Hello and welcome to From Mrs. to Me, a podcast where you'll be inspired by courageous stories of strength and resilience told by women just like you who have been through the upheaval of divorce. This is their journey from Mrs. to Me, finding their true identity and creating a bold, beautiful life. I'm Crissy Freeman and I'm your host, a certified life coach and divorced mother of two. Join me each week as we explore real stories of divorce and what it takes to transform and live in alignment with the real you. Hello and welcome to another episode of From Mrs. to Me. I'm Crissy Freeman, divorce empowerment coach and your host. I'm so excited to share this episode with you and this next guest, Kathy Batista. I met Kathy through our mutual mentor, coach, and colleague, Julie Riesler, owner of the Life Designer Coach Academy, as we are both certified through her Life Designer Coaching Academy, and now part of our Inner Circle Mastermind group, which is amazing. I was immediately drawn to Kathy's warm energy, love of coaching, and the amazing work she's doing with clients. So for some background on Kathy, Kathy is the go-to coach for midlife women. She believes midlife isn't just based on age, it's a phase of life and can be your best one yet. I agree with that completely. By tapping into your values and strength, you can take aligned action to create purpose and joy, leading to that often missing sense of fulfillment. Having navigated midlife changes and shifts, Kathy offers guidance and compassion to women asking themselves, is this it? Or what's next? She enjoys sharing the tools of her growth with her clients and peers. With certifications in life designer coaching, thought coaching, quantum time technique, and mindfulness facilitation, Kathy coaches women to discover their midlife magic through conscious healing and self-discovery. Wow. Talk about life transformation and living with purpose. I can't wait to hear more about your story. Welcome, Kathy.
Oh, Crissy, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to first be on your show and second to share these stories of transformation with your audience.
Thank you, Kathy. And, I know we were chatting before we started and wanted to just share with the audience that your divorce actually occurred several years ago. And your children were very young. I think you shared with me 1 and 3. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me a little bit. I know, I'm asking you to walk back here and reflect on who you were back then, which may have been a very different person. But can you tell me about who Kathy was in that moment, in that time before your divorce?
Yeah. Definitely. And I think that most people that go through divorces, what I've found when speaking with family members and friends is that it actually is really easy to go back to that because it is such a whirlwind. It's such a, for lack of better words, like sometimes it's just this shock, right? Other times it's this slow boil, but it's really easy to go back to that time. And it is really easy for me today to drop back into those feelings. And prior to my divorce, I even felt it then. I felt kind of not immature, but not quite an adult. Like, who on earth said I could have children and a husband? And
right?
Like I felt like very surreal, right? And so, and that led to me not knowing if I was doing it right because I wasn't secure in who I was or what roles I was to play. And it's funny too. It's not funny, but marriages, I believe it's like one of 3 reasons why they dissolve or end is one spouse wants it, the other spouse wants it, or you both want it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my divorce came about because my ex-husband wanted the divorce. And so, like you had said, my kids were 1 and 3. And the first time that my ex-husband, Mike, mentioned divorce was when our youngest was 6 months. And I was so insecure and so unsettled with who I was, which is and was very unlike me. My whole life, I've always had a very strong sense of self, a strong personality. But I just folded to this of, I can't fail. What am I doing wrong? And so I begged and I said, listen, what can we do? Like, we need to fix this. I don't want a divorce. So being very persuasive, I convinced him. And then within 6 months, he asked again. And I realized that it just, you can't want it for yourself, right? Even if I wanted it for my kids, I wanted this ideal, this marriage, this relationship, this family. And it doesn't work when one person is the only one that wants it. And so then we divorced, and the boys were young, and that was just very, very scary. But it also was the first time that I realized that I had the capability and that I was an adult and that I am an amazing mom. And I actually, this divorce, this trauma led me to feeling more secure. And oftentimes it leads us to not, and it wasn't this smooth thing. I mean, it was, of course, not all people who have divorce, but most things are said. You have arguments, you have discussion, things are said, they wound, whatnot. So I took time to heal, but ultimately it led to me feeling so much more secure, like just pulling my bootstraps up. And often people I remember at the time saying, oh my gosh, how are you not a mess? And I'm like, I have a 1 and 3-year-old. I don't have time.
Exactly.
I'm a mess right now, right? Like I had to choose, right? And so then that led to having to deal with those wounds and that trauma later, once that dust settled and I figured out how to navigate being a single mom, divorced at that young age with my young boys. But as I sit here today, right, it's different.
Yeah, of course it is. But when you're in the moment, it is one of the scariest things to go through, right? And I think for so many reasons, I mean, you covered so many things here as, I think about, identity, becoming a mom, you're a wife. And now, everything shifts within a matter of minutes or a matter of days. And now you're a single mom, you're having to manage everything on your own. And some people really, really struggle with that because their identity has become a wife and a mom. And so how do you transition through that and really find confidence? You talked about that confidence. What I would like to ask you, Kathy, is, your kids were really young. And so if you can tell me, how did you sort of redefine that family unit for you and your boys? You talked about, they were really young, having 2 boys. And a lot of women really struggle with navigating that, creating new traditions and just doing things differently now. Can you tell me a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, I think that in the moment of and it really for me wasn't a moment, and I don't think it is for many people. Divorce often takes a lot of moments and a lot of our time and a lot of our money and everything, right? But learning how to meet it with less resistance was something that came, I didn't think about it, but it was very innate for me. I did not particularly care for, and probably actually had feelings of hatred for my ex-husband at the time, right? But the path of least resistance was not to say those in front of the kids and to not even really say it to him. Like, and that isn't just being, taking the higher road and whatnot. It really was actually more about them than it was about me. I'm not from a divorced family. My parents are still together. This is not to say that there wasn't arguments, or I actually can remember when I was 18 years old, they were having a fight and my mom said, I want a divorce. The kids are older. I'm going to leave now. And you would have thought I was 3. I lost it. I cried and I was like, that, right? Like,
yeah,
so
the end of your world.
It was horrible. And so I didn't have a frame of reference of how to navigate this, but I knew that whatever this man was to me, he was their father. And whatever type of dad he was to them, that was his responsibility. But I needed to always shine him in a good light, because I learned early on in life, and it's a rule that I kind of always live by, because for one, it feels good. But when we talk bad about people, it truly just reflects on us. The other people we're speaking to remembers those words, that it was coming from us. So if I knew if I was to bad talk or bad mouth or, oh, he's late again, like, like I could have done, right? That it would be, those memories would be attached to me and not what my intention would have been to attach them to him, right?
Yes.
And so it was very hard to make sure that I met every day with the least resistance, right? If he was canceling, just let it go. If he wanted to show up, just, and also this moved on through all the stages of my children, right? When we have kids, or if you have kids, you notice that they go through phases themselves, and there were times neither one of them wanted to go see him, right? And I'll never push you. I'll never. So it's meeting them and meeting everybody where they're at with the least amount of resistance. But also, Crissy, I can't even stress that it's not about being a doormat or not about having boundaries. It is, but just that least resistance. And like you were saying, having to develop traditions with young kids where, normally it's, the family picks out this Christmas tree together, or they are, doing these holiday things together. We really had to look at making things our own and not feeling, I stressed to myself, not feeling guilt that it wasn't what I thought it was supposed to be, because they didn't have those preconceived notions. They didn't realize that, every Thanksgiving, not everybody just spends it with their dad. Right. Like, so they didn't.
Yeah, they didn't have that.
Yeah. So I tried
because they were so
hard.
young.
Yes, not to push that. And that was about also the meeting the less resistance of like, okay, what holidays are really important to you, to my ex-husband? What, and Thanksgiving was a big one in his family. So for the beginning years of my divorce, I often spent Thanksgiving home alone, which sounds sad, but I loved it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was beautiful to just, it allowed me space and time to breathe. And the world was quiet because everybody else was celebrating. So it was actually really beautiful.
I love that so much. So many nuggets you shared that I think are so important for this audience. And we haven't really touched on yet, is this co-parenting relationship and the importance of, first, I want to highlight what you said about the importance of not talking negatively about your former spouse, Now, it may be your former spouse, and there's a lot of animosity there, right? There's a lot of other baggage and things that we're holding on to that we want to be able to vent, but our children is not the place to do that. And so I'm so glad that you said that. I did come from a family, a divorced family. And what I learned from my experience is not to do that, because my parents did have a very toxic divorce. They did put us in the middle. And I knew that when it came time for me to leave my marriage, that I was not going to do that to my children. And as hard as it is some days, it meant I might have to pick up the phone and call one of my girlfriends in my bedroom with the door locked and just vent and say, is now a good time for you? I need to just share, because if I don't, I'm going to explode.
Yeah.
And so we do need to give ourselves that too, but there is the appropriate way to do that. And I think our kids, they still love their father. In most situations, right? It's the other parent. And so let them also formulate what that relationship is going to be like with their parent. And it might be, Kathy, right, that there are days that they don't want to go there, and
Totally.
for whatever reason. And what we can do is teach them about choice and how they communicate that to the other party, if they're old enough. If they're not old enough, then obviously we can help them navigate that, or we're the one communicating. And that's where the whole co-parenting relationship comes into play, around setting really good communication with your former spouse up front, so that you can have these difficult conversations when needed. And also set boundaries, which is, I love that you said that too. So that's what I want to really highlight is you said so many great things, and this boundaries. I hear from women all the time that, my former spouse, he wants to call me all the time, and it drives me crazy. I'm in the middle of something and he's like, can you talk now? I need to talk now. And is interrupting dinner, or texting me negatively. How do I set boundaries around that? And so I'm curious what your experience was in being successful in setting those clear boundaries with your former spouse.
Yeah, I think I'm remembering definitely that we both, and I can really only speak about me, but talking on the phone or even in person always escalated the emotions for me and him, and you can only hide that for so long. You're on the phone and you've got very young kids, or you're doing drop off and the kids are right there. So we learned through trial and error, and actually, so now we're 16 years later. We only really text. If we see each other, we can talk. Now is so much different, right? Now is just so much different. But we only texted the logistic communications, or, those sorts of, you can't send them home with all their dirty laundry every time, because it's and then expect me to pack them up. It's setting up those rules. And if it's in text, people often say sometimes text loses stuff, but sometimes that's good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It loses the edge of
I wouldn't mind losing some of those. That's for sure. Yeah.
So it can always be clarified, but for us, that really de-escalated the emotion around the divorce, right? Because I know for certain, if you were to interview Mike, there were things, he was very resentful in the beginning of the settlements and what the courts found, and how, so there was that anger around those things, right? And so he, I'm sure, is coming to the table with his own issues around the divorce, right? As well as I'm coming with mine, and I could have argued the settlement should have been different. But anyway,
Right.
it's like, it's always something because it is so personal. Like if we think of how the relationship with this individual started, it's most often very charged, and you're in love and you're committing to spending the rest of your life together. Those are strong emotions. So we can only assume that on the other side, they're just as strong. And so we have to create those boundaries of not stoking that fire of resentment and anger. And so for us, it was really going, how can we communicate best? And a lot of acceptance. Like I had to stop asking for certain things. Like it's almost like that saying, like someone shows you who they are, believe them, right? How many times do I have to say, different things like, do you want to see the kids? And do you want, like, you just start to learn that they have their own idea of what they want and that it may not resonate or line up with mine. And so the boundaries is more saving my peace of mind instead of going like, why can't he see it this way? And that might not be the best way to handle this, is to say, like, I know what's best for these kids. And for running the risk of being sexist, most mothers do know what's best for their kids.
Yes, they do.
And most moms you just have these instinctual things, right? And so to have that boundary of, I cannot control whatever parent-child relationship comes out of their experience together because of what I want for that relationship, that I want him to be this type of dad. And so that it's just learning to almost pull back and have sort of a presence and awareness around it. So that, I guess, long answer, but definitely creating boundaries of communication. But I also know that there are marriages that, and I have some in my family that they communicate and are so much better apart. Their parenting is so much better, right? It's like they just are, this is an amazing, my sister, for one, my sister is divorced and her ex-husband, the father of her children, is her business partner and co-parent. And they do those two things beautifully. They just didn't have that marriage part beautifully. So every divorce situation, it's so unique. And then that's where we need to lend grace to ourselves, because if I was to say, oh my gosh, how come my ex-husband can't be like my sister Christine's ex-husband? Now it's just comparing these situations. We have to allow for that grace and then decide what we want for our relationship with this ex and for our relationship with our children, and allow everything else to sort of create its own, because it doesn't necessarily include me, which sometimes feels hurtful, but it doesn't.
Yeah. Oh, so true. And, I think this is a really good lesson. Divorce is a good lesson in what we can and can't control, right? Because at the end of the day, we can only control ourselves and how we react and how we respond to things. And I always say, unless there is a safety concern, parenting differently is okay, meaning it may not be handled exactly the same way, but as long as you are communicating with your co-parent so you know what's happening in that house in terms of how it might impact you when they come into your house, that is very important, right?
Yeah.
But controlling how they respond to things and, how they might put the child to bed versus how you put them to bed, there are certain things that we just need to let go of and know that the other parent is doing the best that they can. And, when we are constantly saying, Jeffrey told me that you didn't give him that snack before bed and he always gets that. It's just going to make the divide even greater between you and that co-parent. And then when there's a big thing that you do need to discuss and be on the same page around, it's so much more difficult to navigate through that. So so many great points that you shared there. I love it. And I'm glad we got to focus on the co-parenting relationship there for a minute. But I want to shift a little bit because you talked about, Thanksgiving and the holiday and how you were alone. And you do so much work now around healing. And, I think regardless of whether it's at the end of a divorce or it's another life change, we all need to do the inner healing, right? We need to take care of ourselves. And that is the self-love, the self-care that so many of us sort of forget about, and we put ourselves last. And so I'm curious what sort of tips or helpful things you might have for the audience around self-care and healing.
Yeah. I know that this probably doesn't help, but it is always so unique and so different. And so for me with my divorce, and so I'm going to be really honest and say that one of the chief complaints that Mike had that he wanted to divorce was that he no longer found me attractive to have sex or to be intimate with, right? And that was a huge blow to my inner and outer self-esteem. And
I can't imagine.
Yeah. And so that was where I had to focus first, was why was I I had lost myself, I deemed that now I was not worthy as a woman or worthy as to receive love. And that it's prior to marriage, and even probably at the beginning of the marriage, I've always had really a good outlook. I love myself. I loved myself then. Even when I was a kid, I would say I would tell my mom, I love everything about me. I even love my name. I just always loved myself. And
we should have been friends when we were little. I was the same exact.
Yeah, right? Yeah. But this divorce threw me for a loop because I didn't realize how much that outside validation, I needed it, and it affected me. And it was, yes, now I was divorced and I had this broken marriage and my children were children of divorce. And that was a huge trauma and I had to get over. But what affected me more was that I was visually unappealing, and I was ugly and unattractive and not useful. It just hit me to the core. So that's where I had to focus on. And that's when I was my Thanksgivings were beautiful because it was this me, myself, and I time where I was intentionally celebrating and being grateful for myself and having that time and learning to love myself. And it was really coming back to that individual that I do love myself. And no matter, I believe, sure, we can find somebody attractive on the outside, but that's not what attracts me to my husband now or what attracts me to other people. It's that soul connection, and that I have a beautiful soul and it was just waiting to be connected with somebody. And so a lot of those self-care tips were, for me, realizing that I didn't have to follow rules, right? People, when are you going to get back out and date? Why are you spending the night home alone? You have your kids all week and now it's this one night. Why aren't you going out? Why aren't you doing this? I needed to find way that it worked for me, and not like if somebody said, oh, it's not good for you to spend your nights all alone when the kids go. And if I would have believed them in that, I would have missed out on what my soul was calling for, was that cocooning time and was that reintroduction to the love that I have for myself. And so it's really getting clear on, and believe you me, there were definitely times I went out and like, I mean, it is a weird thing to like enter the dating scene. That has to be a whole nother podcast. I can come back about that.
Oh yeah. We'll need you to come back for that.
Yeah, that's a huge topic. Especially with these wounds of like, no one's going to find you attractive. I have some stories around that, but it's finding what works for you, right? And one thing that might not look like self-care to other people and might sound counterintuitive to my comments that, Mike found me unattractive and that my body, and I mean, between me and you, my good Lord, I had just had 2 kids, but anyway.
Right? One was one.
But,
wow.
Right? Like two and two. But anyways, so what I did, and I remember this still now for self-care on those nights, because he would only take the kids one night a week. And so that one night for, I want to say, probably almost a year, one thing during our marriage is Mike did not like Chinese food. And I've always loved good Chinese food.
Yes.
And so I would order more than one person could eat. And I wouldn't eat it all, but it was that self-care of, I'm going to spend this night ordering Chinese food, whatever I want from this menu, and I'm going to watch whatever I want on this TV.
Yes.
Right. And that was so therapeutic to go, you deserve to have Chinese food and have whatever you want from it. Right. And even eat it the next day for breakfast. So what? Right. And so that it might seem counterintuitive to somebody who goes, oh, but your wound is that you find yourself unattractive now. Why are you spending this night watching TV and eating Chinese food? But it fed parts of me, sort of like when we do inner child work and we do things that feed that part and it just gives life to our whole being. I remember that being, I mean, it doesn't feel as a need to have Chinese food now as it was then. Like I hardly ever really, but then I remember it. Oh, I remember it. And it's funny because, but I remember doing that and knowing that there was this element of FU that felt really good.
Yeah. Oh, I love this so much, Kathy, because first of all, I love that you stayed home and that you said you gave yourself what you needed, because I can't tell you how many of us, including myself, after my divorce, was so afraid of this being alone and what other people might think. And it was like, nope, you have to get right back on the horn. You have to get busy, make sure you're busy. And I was so busy that I did not have time to even think about what I wanted, to even now I have this beautiful journaling practice where I'm able to really just sit with a warm cup of coffee. And oh, do I love that. It's my favorite time of day. Instead of doing those things or getting my favorite meal that I wanted to by myself, I was busying myself and I was out there and not really giving myself that self-love, self-care, whatever it looks like for me. I didn't even know what that was because I wasn't slowing down and giving myself that time. And I think that is part of the healing process is, too many women don't want to feel the pain. And so it's like, okay, instead of feel it, I'm going to go out with my girlfriends every night. And when I'm not going out with my girlfriends, I'm going to be going on dates. I'm going to make sure I'm getting myself out there. So then when it comes time for, I think I want to, get back into my next relationship, you haven't healed those wounds and you still don't really know exactly what you want in that authentic new relationship. And so we're repeating old patterns that were coming up before in the past. So I love that you did that. That's amazing. And it probably brought you to your new spouse that you ended up meeting because you had gone through the healing. You had really allowed yourself to have that time to figure out who you were and what you wanted in a relationship going forward. Would you say that's accurate?
I definitely would, because just like kind of turning off those people, the outside noise, and they often all mean well. They all want the best, and especially because they're hurting for us too, because they love us and see this, right? But turning off whatever, because I did meet my now husband, Dave, about 2.5 years after the divorce. And so some people thought that was too soon, right? Like, so you're always going to have somebody's input, right? And so if you get clear on, and this is another topic too for remarrying, like Dave and I went to like counseling together because we both come from divorces, and we were like, we're not going to do it. We need to get clear. And that's really important. Taking that time for yourself and getting clear on what your role was in it. Everybody, it's not a one person fight here, right? Everybody has a part to play, right? And big or small, getting clear on what I needed to change, what I did that might have been, manipulative or passive aggressive or unloving, right? And how I behaved and what I would have wanted for myself and what I would have wanted from somebody else. To get clear on that is so important. And that's where I think if people are coming to, this transitional coach like yourself for divorce, like that is such a huge impact and a service you're doing to yourself and your future self, because you set yourself up for success by kind of cleaning out the weeds, right? It's sort of like that. All of a sudden you wake up and you look in your backyard and your once beautiful flower bed is just overgrown with weeds and you don't know what's what. You have no idea. So you can go in and tear it all up, or you can go in and mindfully look and sometimes that is where help comes in, whether it's a therapist or a friend or a coach, to mindfully look and go, okay, what do I want this to look like? And how can I make that happen? And that takes time.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because, it does. That's one of if I could give, the audience sort of one thing to really focus on after divorce, or even, pre-divorce, is what is the support that you're going to need? Because I call it your village, meaning it is friends. Yes, you definitely need the support of friends and family, but it's also those other professionals that can really give you the tools, action steps that you can implement. And I didn't find a coach until much longer. I'd gone to marriage counseling, but then, once we decided to move forward with the divorce, I didn't do anything for a while. I sort of just tried to navigate it on my own. I didn't do a very good job for a while.
That's okay.
And, I learned, I did finally find a coach and, I still communicate with her to this day. And I still have a coach for myself. I mean, I think through every phase of our lives, having that support is really crucial in our growth. And it doesn't mean that we're broken. It doesn't mean, that something's wrong with us. It means that we're just getting that little extra guidance that we might need to be able to reflect and say, okay, I'm okay. I got this. And I've got my village behind me who is helping me along the way, which is huge.
Well, and I think it's something to be said for that. I'm assuming that this is how other people's friends are, but my friends were like, yeah, what a jerk. Yeah, what a jerk. Right. So then you have all this noise and support around that aspect of it, but that doesn't lead to identifying where your responsibility laid and identifying how you can grow from it. And my mother and father, I have learned to really admire their response to this, in that they supported me and they helped when and where they could. But to this day, they do not say an unkind word about my ex-husband. And it is because that's their grandchildren's dad. And that really taught me a lot about how to interact with Mike, and knowing, like, with that, we want to keep my children's that sacredness of that relationship. So there was this element when it first happened where I was like, why aren't they giving me that? My poor baby, he's such a jerk. Well, you know what I mean? But now I appreciate it. But to your point, we have some people in our lives who just keep their mouth shut. They don't want to get involved into it. Or if you might have a brother who's really good friends with your ex. And so it's this silence, or they're like on the bagwagon with their pitchforks and then like they're ready to go with you. But to have someone in your corner that is truly in your corner, in your personal growth, in developing who you are going to become. Because in some cases, it's truly like a death of that identity. And so you need to rebuild a new one. And so to have somebody in your corner that is solely for your purpose and your growth it's invaluable.
Yes. And what a beautiful gift that your parents gave you, right?
Yeah.
And I did have friends in my life as well who, again, loved me, but there was a lot of negativity. There was a lot of questioning decisions that I would make, almost like they felt sort of responsible for me now because, I had gone through this significant change. And, so I would say it's okay to, if friendships do start to change for a period of time, because sometimes that going through that significant change, like you said, like a death, it is an opportunity for us to sort of self-reflect and look at things a little differently and say, who are those people that I really need in my life, that are really going to help me to shine and to be my authentic self. And I'm not saying to say goodbye to all your other friends, because they do love you. It's just, I'm saying there might be a shift, and there might be new people that come into your life as a result. And that's okay. It might be a beautiful gift.
Exactly. It might be better than okay. But I'm wondering, I just am remembering now with friends, I don't know if this happened to you, but telling friends that we were getting divorced and whatnot. And I mean, I had some who were like, oh, I knew it would never work. And you're how helpful is that?
That's
right?
great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, you were at my wedding going, nope, this ain't lasting, right? Like, and you're just going, oh my gosh, it actually is it feels so much worse because you feel like you were late to the joke. Everybody knew, and you just hook, line, and sinker went for it, and everybody else was going, I knew this wasn't good. That is the worst. That's the worst feeling, and it's so unsupportive. Yeah. So maybe even some of your listeners are friends of people going through.
Yes, I was just going to say that. So if you are friends to someone who is going through this, please do not say these things.
Yes. Oh, I'll never forget. It really it felt like, it felt worse. It felt so bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do, Kathy, as I said at the beginning, I love listening to you and the passion and love you have for coaching the women that you work with. And a lot of the women that follow this podcast are women in their midlife. And so they're going through other things other than just divorce, going through the change and some other shifts. So Can you tell me a little bit about, we talk about pivots and different changes that we make. Tell me about this work that you're doing with women and this pivot that you made to sort of create this coaching business.
Yeah. So for me, midlife came hard and fast. And in midlife, I work with this knowledge of it being 35 to 70 years old. It's the largest time of our life. And within that, we have many transitions and many purposes. So if you learn how to navigate the transition, it's like kind of having a blueprint for the next one that comes along. So we work with this knowledge that we are going to have these transitions, and midlife actually for women coincides with perimenopause, which thankfully is becoming, so much more talked about. And because what happens is our estrogen levels start to decline, and we have estrogen receptors all over our bodies. And one of the first places that they start to decline is in our brain, which then leads to sleep disturbances, mood swings, and feeling of sadness and all that. And so it's this marriage of chronologically having a shift as well as biologically having a shift. And it's just this bam, right? And I didn't do really well. I didn't handle it really well. I drank too much. I ate too much. I shopped too much. I didn't talk about it. And there was guilt around it because I felt so miserable, but everything was wonderful. And especially, Crissy, being somebody who had gone through a divorce, and then you find this love again. And so what do I have to complain about, right? But I still felt like complaining all the time. So there was that guilt and shame that I felt miserable. And so I just shoved it down. And then finally finding my way out, I said, there has to be a better way to handle and navigate these shifts, because I knew more would come during this largest time of our life. And often when we're younger, we go through transitions and there's people to help us, right? I mean, you've got guidance counselors helping you pick out your school, and then you're getting married and you have all this support. You have children and they're coming out of the woodwork to see your children, but you go through midlife transition and no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to. So this is where we need to create this community of women and find this support so that you can say, because what happens is we ask ourselves, like, is this it? Is this all there is? Like we're 35, 40, 45, 50. Is this it? What's next? This can't be it, right? And so having somebody help you navigate your answers to those questions of what's next for you. And it might be building off of where you are, or it might be a complete restructure, a complete identity growth of who you want to become. But it's so important to acknowledge that, yeah, things don't feel that great right now. I'm not feeling like myself, which ultimately is you are expressing yourself in a way that is not expressing your values or promoted by your strengths. And so that's what I help women to do, is to find ways to grow while you're being supported by your own values and helped with your own individual strengths. Because everybody has an answer for us, but it might not be the one that works for us.
Yes, yes. Oh, so much of that resonates with me where I'm at in my life right now. So I hear you. And, it's the same. Like, I loved what you said around everything is great, but why am I not feeling that way? And it's, it happens to me so often right now, is just like you said, I did go through that whole, divorce transformation and changing my life and doing the things that I love now. Yeah. And have an amazing relationship. But there's still this thing that wants to keep nagging at me, saying, things aren't right. Things aren't right. There's chaos here. Why? Why does it feel so chaotic?
Yeah.
And I can't sleep and, all those other things. So that's so great that you're offering this for women, because I just think it's so needed. And you're right. We don't talk about it enough. I'm
Yeah.
finally starting to hear it a little more and more, but it's still not enough.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
in mainstream. So
Definitely. And I feel like with these transitions, when we're feeling this unsettled and this disturbed and this is something is wrong, it's hitting us so hard. And I don't know how to say this without really saying it, but it's never as hard as it seems. Sometimes it's just little tweaks in our lives that, like, I often tell people, like, you're on your journey, you know exactly where you're going. I just have a flashlight so you don't trip over that rock right there, right? Like, it's
that's perfect.
Yeah. So it's like it's all inside of you, but sometimes it just feels so hard. But when we pull back and you have somebody else helping you shine a light on it, it truly never is as hard as it seems when you're in that mess, right? When you're in that thick of it. And I love seeing, and I mean, look at you, this podcast, your growth, it's like incredible. And it's inspirational to other women to go, yeah, you can reinvent yourself at any point in time. You can build off of yourself and create your identity, because your identity is just your habits. Your identity is what you do every day. And so you can become that.
Yes. And that's so much about the work that I'm doing with women is about around your identity. But one last question that I want to ask you, Kathy, that I like to ask all my guests, which is, how do you define authenticity?
Yes, authenticity.
For yourself.
Yeah, to define authenticity for myself, it's such an amazing word, because there is a definition, right? But also it's so different for everybody. But when I'm authentic and when I know I'm being authentic is when it is that ease. When it's that ease, or when the best is when I catch myself joyful and smiling, right? And I know that what I'm doing is authentic. And you really, through the work that I do, I have this like 3-pillar approach that I work with my women. And the first one is mood, where we get really intentional about our body. And that's honestly the first clue as to when and where and how you're being authentic, is getting in touch with how that shows up in your body. And so for me, I know where I feel authenticity. I know where, if someone asks me to do something, and within seconds, if it's aligned, authenticity is for me being aligned with my values, with my strengths, and living from that place of alignment where I'm being authentic. And now, is it 100% of the time? No. Do I always listen to my body? Right? Like, that's what life is about. It's about learning from those times that it's like, oh my gosh, why did I say that? Why did I do that? It felt so unaligned. Then I know that I wasn't being authentic to my true higher inner self, right? So for me, it's just that moments of joy that I find, and that sneaking feeling when you smile, it just feels so good.
Oh yeah. It's like this podcast interview with you right now. Like, all I want to do is like smile. I'm so happy. I know that I'm exactly where I need to be in this moment.
Me too.
And and that's where you're in alignment, right?
Yes.
And so I love that you feel it in your entire being, and it just lights you up. And so, but you're right. I don't have that all the time. There are paying bills and other things I need to do that do not always make me feel so authentic and wonderful. But but that is such a good way to think about it. So thank you for sharing that. And so, Kathy, if the audience wants to connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah. First, I would love if you want to connect. That's amazing. I love meeting amazing people and people who are on their journey. So you can find me on social media at Coach Kathy Batista, or you can go straight to my website, which is my name, kathybatista.com. And I have a free quiz on my website that I am such not a gatekeeper. Like, I was like, oh, here's a freebie. And then all of a sudden, like, I have 12 freebies. If you take this quiz, like, I just can't, because I feel like coaching should be so accessible to people. And sometimes people don't want to take that step. So there's tons of freebies after this quiz. And just like you, I'm starting a little something new. So you can also find me on YouTube. Under my YouTube channel, it's Teachings and Tangents with Kathy Batista. And we just have a lot of fun. They're short little teachings and tangents. And so you can find me there too.
Oh, I love that. And for the audience, I'll also include everything that Kathy just talked about in the show notes, so you can access that after as well if you don't have a pen in hand. And so thank you so much, Kathy. And for those of you listening, if you're interested in joining the From Mrs. to Me community, you can find us on Facebook at From Mrs. to Me, Rediscovering You After Divorce. And speaking of freebies, as Kathy just mentioned, we are going through right now a 30-day intention challenge and would love for you to join. It's free. So come on in and join the fun. And if you like this podcast, please rate, review it wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. So keep doing that inner work, and I'll see you here next time. I hope you enjoyed another episode of From Mrs. to Me, real life stories of real women and their journey of transformation after divorce. I'm Crissy Freeman, and if you like this episode, please drop a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a story to share? Are you ready to inspire other women on their journey through divorce? If so, find me on Instagram at From Mrs. to Me. For more tools and resources on creating your path to transformation after divorce, follow my community on Facebook, From Mrs. to Me, Rediscovering You After Divorce.